Mike Brown, 2012 Lakers, the Princeton offense nobody wanted. The 2012 Lakers should have been unfair. Kobe Bryant was still sharp as steel. Steve Nash, one of the greatest floor generals ever, a woo. Pau Gasol was not left out, a high IQ post maestro. And Dwight Howard, a defensive supernova in his prime. That roster should have run teams off the floor. They understood every technique there is to the court. They played fast, attacked space. They simply played modern basketball before it went mainstream. Instead of taking advantage of this force, Mike Brown tried to run the Princeton offense, a system built on slow reads, backdoor cuts, equal distribution, and structure. His approach was a total disaster. It was the exact opposite of everything the roster was physically built to do. Kobe was forced to wait for actions to unfold, thereby putting him in a cage. Nash was told to follow patterns instead of orchestrating improvisation. It ended up limiting everything he stands for. Pau became a spot-release safety valve, and Dwight Howard, on the other hand, who happens to be the most explosive vertical lob threat in the league, became a stationary screener. Mike Brown turned all of their potentials against them. What he did was bad coaching, with a misaligned identity. The players ended up not trusting the system, and the system likewise didn't trust the players. Every possession looked like hesitation with every game they played. However, the season lasted 5 games before he was smoked out. For Mike Brown and the Lakers, it wasn't a record problem. It was a philosophy error so obvious the franchise couldn't pretend it would fix itself. Derek Fisher, 2014 Knicks. The triangle revival that broke the locker room. This might happen to be the most upsetting coaching opportunity in the history of the NBA. Derek Fisher didn't get time to learn. He went from NBA court to NBA clipboard in 11 days, and that would have already been difficult, without the pressure of New York. But instead of running a modern pace and space, Fisher was ordered to resurrect Phil Jackson's triangle offense, thereby living in a box of his shadow. However, the problem wasn't the triangle itself. It's a system built for elite mid-post hubs, high IQ cutters, and role players who thrive without dribbling. Think about this formation: MJ, Pippen, Kobe, Pau. The Knicks did not have those elite players. Carmelo Anthony could operate in it, but not alone. The supporting cast was a rotating carousel of streaky scoring and inconsistent defense. This left the triangle stripped away pace, pick and roll, and rhythm, everything the modern NBA was already shifting toward. Fisher wasn't just fighting game plans, he was fighting time, as he needed to execute and deliver. Unfortunately, the league had moved forward while the Knicks were trying to resurrect history. The season collapsed on them to a 17-65. This wasn't a failure of effort, it was no doubt a failure of the right result in the wrong era. The past doesn't return just because you want it to, and the Knicks had to learn in the hard way. Byron Scott, 2014 to 2016 Lakers. The young core that wasn't allowed to grow. When Kobe Bryant's era was ending, the Lakers weren't supposed to contend with it. All they needed to do was transition, develop, and nurture the next identity of the franchise. Some of their prospects were D'Angelo Russell, Julius Randle, Jordan Clarkson, and Brandon Ingram. These were 4 players who would eventually become all-stars. 4 players who would define entire offenses in other cities. The future wasn't just possible, it was already in the room. But Byron Scott didn't coach for the future. He coached for discipline, and discipline without development becomes punishment. He believed young players should earn trust the hard way, so mistakes didn't become lessons, they became benchings. Randle would check out after a turnover, he gets pulled. D'Angelo Russell would hit 2 shots, miss 1, he gets pulled. Ingram's confidence would finally show, only for his touches to disappear. Clarkson was allowed to play because he could create his own shot, but even he was boxed into tight roles that discouraged improvisation. And it wasn't quiet. Scott didn't just correct, he criticized publicly, questioned their maturity, their effort, and their commitment. The message to the young core wasn't, "You'll grow." It was, "You're not enough yet." Scott believed development requires freedom to fail. However, these players didn't bloom in Los Angeles, they bloomed everywhere else. Randle became an All-NBA centerpiece in New York. Ingram became a franchise cornerstone in New Orleans. Russell became an all-star in Brooklyn, and Clarkson became a 6th man of the year in Utah. While Byron Scott was unable to see and manage these talents, he ended up distorting the opportunity to utilize all of these talents for Lakers. He simply walked away with his face down. David Blatt, 2014 to 2016 Cavaliers, a genius swallowed by LeBron gravity. David Blatt didn't come to the NBA as a rookie coach. He arrived as a champion, a mastermind of European basketball, a coach known for complex motion offenses, misdirection sets, and tactical precision. He came to Cleveland expecting to teach and to build something. Then all of a sudden, LeBron James came back home and everything changed. LeBron didn't just join the roster, he became the gravitational center of the franchise. The offense, the culture, the expectations, literally everything revolved around him. Not because he demanded it, but because greatness bends reality. Blatt and LeBron didn't hate each other. They just lived in different basketball languages. While Blatt believed in structure, trust the system, trust the scheme. LeBron believed in controlled chaos. Read, react, exploit the moment no one else sees. Blatt called plays, but LeBron changed them on the floor. Not out of disrespect, but because he could read the game faster than the playbook could predict. The locker room followed LeBron's instinct, not Blatt's design. And slowly, the authority lines blurred. A head coach cannot be a head coach when his voice is not the final voice. And that was Blatt's downfall at the Cavaliers. No doubt Cleveland was winning, but the chemistry felt like two engines pushing the same train on different tracks. Unfortunately, the front office made the decision everyone saw coming. Blatt was walked out of the team, and Tyronn Lue came in. Months later, Cleveland won the championship. Blatt didn't fail the NBA. The NBA simply already belonged to someone else. Mark Jackson, 2011 to 2014 Warriors, the architect who never got the keys. Not everyone who builds greatness gets to stay long enough to enjoy it. Mark Jackson was one of those stories. He didn't inherit a dynasty, he created its foundation. Before the Warriors became a global symbol of beautiful basketball, they were a talented but directionless team. Steph Curry was brilliant but inconsistent. Klay Thompson was a shooter still finding his place. Draymond Green was a second-round pick fighting for minutes. Jackson didn't just coach them, he validated them. He told Steph he was the greatest shooter alive before the world believed it. He trusted Klay's shot selection when others called it reckless. Jackson allowed Draymond's voice to grow loud when the league didn't even know his name. He simply built identity through defense, toughness, emotional unity, and belief. But belief alone doesn't build longevity. Jackson coached like a fortress, loyalty inside, doubt outside. His staff division, his strained relationship with the front office, and his unwillingness to collaborate created crises. The organization didn't fire him because he failed. They fired him because they wanted evolution, and Jackson's walls left no room for new ideas. Then Steve Kerr arrived. He took the foundation, the confidence, the defensive DNA, the mentality, and layered spacing, motion, creativity, and joy. The dynasty didn't begin with Kerr's system. It began with Jackson whispering, "You already have everything you need." He built the house, but was unfortunate to live in it. Jason Kidd, Milwaukee Bucks, 2014 to 2018, the overswitching experiment. Jason Kidd came to Milwaukee like a visionary, not just as a coach, but a basketball philosopher. He saw a young, long, athletic team and wanted to build a defense that swallowed the whole court upon any game. So he introduced something interesting, which he called an identity. His plans were to switch everything, trap everything, and pressure everything. At first, it looked brilliant, but did it work? A defense that looked like it was unfolding in real time, arms everywhere, and passing lanes erased. Young Giannis blossomed, Middleton sharpened, and the team felt fearless. But a system built on aggression is only as strong as its discipline. Kidd, on the other hand, rarely adjusted, giving room for opponents to study the tape. They learned to distort angles, force mismatches, pull the Bucks into rotation so deep they couldn't recover. Meanwhile, the locker room cracked. Kidd coached through pressure instead of partnership. He pushed players hard, often publicly, believing tension built character. But what Kidd forgot was tension without trust builds fractures. However, by the end, the team stopped responding to his antics. Not because they disliked Kidd, but because they had outgrown him. At this point, the scheme had a ceiling, and the voice had an expiration date. Giannis didn't become MVP under Kidd. Instead, he became an MVP after learning structure. Kidd, on the other hand, didn't fail because the idea was wrong. He failed because he tried to force the idea to become the identity. Jim Boylen, Chicago Bulls. 2018 to 2020, the punch clock era. Everyone is entitled to their own belief system, just as Jim Boylen believed in toughness. Real toughness, practice hard, play hard, and then earn your stripes. It was no doubt a noble idea, but in the wrong era, with the wrong execution. Boylen introduced punch clock practices, thereby conditioning drills after losses, and film room confrontations framed like military briefings. The roster was young. He had Levine, Markkanen, Carter Jr., and Kobe White. These were players who needed teaching, not punishment, and instead of development, they got discipline without direction. It got so bad that players held a team-only meeting just to decide whether to boycott practice or not, and that was the beginning of breakdown. It was leadership rejection in plain sight. Games began to look like they were coached against the players, and not with them. Levine once hit 13 threes, and Boylen benched him the next night. It was not for strategy, but for accountability. The Bulls weren't becoming tougher anymore as he had projected, they were becoming resentful. And by the time Boylen was gone, Chicago didn't need a new system. All they needed was healing from the trauma Boylen had inflicted them. Coaching isn't just about X's and O's. It's about personalities, pressure, and decisions that can make or break a season. Which NBA coaching disaster shocked you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments, smash that like button if you love inside stories, and hit subscribe so you never miss the chaos behind the bench. Nate Bjorkgren, Indiana Pacers, 2020 to 2021, The Locker Room Revolt. Nate Bjorkgren arrived in Indiana with the reputation of a modern basketball mind. Spacing, pace, dynamic movement, and creativity, he basically spoke the language of the new NBA. The players were curious, the front office was hopeful with what he was going to do with the team. Everyone expected innovation, but innovation means nothing if you forget humans are the ones executing it. Bjorkgren didn't just coach, he controlled, and every rotation, every read, every breath of the offense was monitored. Film sessions became lectures, timeouts became critiques. Spontaneity, the lifeblood of NBA players, was replaced with constant oversight, and players don't grow under surveillance, they shrink. Veterans felt disrespected, the younger players felt on trial instead of supported. Assistant coaches, the bridge between the locker room and the head coach, also found themselves isolated. There was no input, collaboration, or trust. The breakdown didn't happen under bright arena lights. It happened in hallways, meeting rooms, quiet moments after practice. Conversations were met with silence, and energy faded. The locker room didn't argue with him, they withdrew from him. And once a coach loses the locker room, the season ends long before the schedule does. The Pacers didn't collapse because of X's and O's. They collapsed because basketball is still a people sport, and Bjorkgren forgot that systems don't run players. Players run systems. By the time the season closed, the decision was inevitable. This wasn't a tactical failure, it was a human failure, created by the coach, not the roster. Isiah Thomas, New York Knicks, 2003 to 2008, the Empire of Missteps. Isiah Thomas is a basketball savant on the court, an artist of angles, instincts, improvisation, and emotional rhythm. As a player, his genius was undeniable, but that same instinctive creativity did not translate to the front office or the sidelines. As the Knicks coach and executive, Thomas followed gut feelings instead of strategy. He collected scorers who needed the ball at the same time, players with overlapping strengths and identical weaknesses. He signed contracts that were too large, too long, and too restrictive, leaving the team financially stuck with no exit plan. Talent came in, but identity never did. Draft picks felt disconnected, roster pieces clashed, and the team became a collage of misplaced potential. The Knicks did not grow, they cluttered. And when direction disappears, culture decays. The losses piled up, but the real damage was internal. The locker room was divided, tension sat in every conversation, and trust was eroded at every level. The front office became a storm of controversy, culminating in lawsuits, headlines, and public embarrassment. In New York, silence is louder than anger, and Madison Square Garden fell silent. Thomas didn't fail because he lacked passion or intelligence. He failed because vision without structure turns genius into chaos. He tried to build a masterpiece using pieces that didn't fit together, forcing talent to become something it wasn't. Flip Saunders, Washington Wizards, 2009 to 2012, the right coach at the wrong time. Flip Saunders was the kind of coach every player respects. Patient, methodical, and a teacher at heart. He understood systems, spacing, rotations, and fundamentals. He could design offenses that moved like clockwork and defenses that suffocated mistakes before they happened. On paper, he was perfect for any team wanting to improve. But the Washington in 2009 to 2012 wasn't a team looking for perfection. It was a locker room filled with chaos, uncertainty, and personalities that hadn't learned discipline. Veterans were declining, rookies were raw, and the franchise itself had no clear identity. The Wizards needed a spark, someone to stabilize, motivate, and demand accountability first. They didn't need diagrams or meticulous rotations. They needed fire. Flip tried. He implemented systems, ran practices with precision, and preached fundamentals. But he couldn't change the culture overnight, and players struggled to buy in. Mistakes weren't just tactical, they were emotional. The room wasn't ready for lessons in basketball. It needed lessons in responsibility, commitment, and toughness. The result before game time was predictable. Games slipped as frustration grew, and the media criticism intensified. Flip, the brilliant tactician, became a casualty of context. His principles were sound, his strategies intelligent. But timing in the NBA is as critical as talent, and here, it failed him. When he left, it wasn't because he lacked knowledge. It was because knowledge alone couldn't fix a team unprepared for guidance. Flip Saunders was right, but he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, with a roster that wasn't ready to learn. And that, in the NBA, is sometimes the harshest lesson of all. Steve Nash, Brooklyn Nets, 2020 to 2022, the team with no center of gravity. Steve Nash was handed a Ferrari with no steering system. Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden. On talent, the Nets didn't need a coach. They needed maintenance. But NBA basketball is not just skill. It is structure, ego, accountability, and shared identity. Nash coached like a collaborator instead of an authority figure. He wanted harmony, input, flow. But super teams don't run on democracy, they run on clarity. The offense relied on individual brilliance. When it worked, it looked unstoppable. But brilliance without structure collapses under pressure. There were no habits to fall back on, no identity to anchor possessions, no defensive spine to hold leads. Then came availability chaos, injuries, vaccination drama, and the most painful of it all, Harden's exit. Roster reshuffles mid-season. Every week the team changed. Every month, the blueprint rewrote itself. Nash wasn't coaching a season, he was managing turbulence. His voice grew faint in a room filled with louder personalities. The players respected him, but they did not follow him. And a coach is only a coach when his voice sets the direction. Brooklyn didn't fail because Nash lacked intelligence. Nash is a basketball savant. Brooklyn failed because talent is not identity, and identity is the one thing Nash never got the chance, space, or authority to create. The Nets were a super team with no center of gravity, and Nash got swallowed by the orbit he was trying to magnify. Brett Brown, Philadelphia 76ers, 2013 to 2020, the process without a finish line. Brett Brown didn't coach a basketball team. He coached a construction site. He arrived in Philadelphia at the height of the process, where losing wasn't a failure, it was the plan. The roster was constantly shifting, draft picks rotated in and out, and every season felt like a rehearsal for something that hadn't arrived yet. Brown was patient, positive, and steady. He gave players room to grow. He protected his locker room from the noise, and he preached development. He watched Embiid become a force. He watched Ben Simmons become a unique weapon. The foundation was real, the pieces were real, and the city began to believe. But belief alone doesn't build identity. As the roster evolved into a contender, the structure did not. The offense often stalled into isolation, and the spacing never made sense. Simmons and Embiid never complemented each other because Brown never built a system where they had to. And when pressure came, roles became blurry. The team played heavy, hesitant basketball. And the deeper the Sixers went into the playoffs, the more glaring the lack of clarity became. Brett Brown was not the wrong coach. He was simply the right coach for the wrong phase. He was perfect for development, patience, and growth phase. But championships require definition, accountability, and sharp edges. Brown built the house. He just couldn't finish the architecture. Earl Watson, Phoenix Suns, 2016 to 2017. The burnout of a young locker room. Earl Watson came to Phoenix as the kind of coach every young player hopes for: relatable and supportive. Someone who understood the emotional side of growth. A coach who could connect on a human level. Someone who could guide without intimidation. On paper, it sounded perfect for a Suns roster full of talent and turbulence, but talent alone doesn't make a team. And Phoenix was a wildfire waiting to burn. Devin Booker was emerging, a future superstar still learning his wings. Eric Bledsoe was frustrated, longing for direction. Veterans were aging, unsure of their place, and the front office? They were sending mixed signals at every turn, as the Suns needed stability. They needed clarity. Watson tried to build culture first. He preached togetherness, teamwork, and positivity. He gave philosophy, he gave words. But in the NBA, culture without structure can quickly crumble. Rotations changed week to week, and roles were undefined. Players didn't know where they stood in the grand scheme of things. The energy in the locker room shifted from excitement to frustration faster than anyone could stop it. And while the players liked Watson personally, likability didn't convert to authority. Leadership is clarity, and without it, the team drifted. Every good intention was swallowed by chaos. By the third game of the next season, the Suns had enough. Watson was relieved of his duties. The experiment had failed, not because he lacked empathy or vision, but because even the best intentions can't survive when strategy, structure, and authority are missing. Luke Walton, Sacramento Kings, 2019 to 2022, the promise that never developed. Luke Walton arrived in Sacramento with reputation and optimism. He was fresh off the Warriors' assistant glow and the temporary Lakers' shine. The belief was simple: he had seen winning up close, so maybe he could recreate it. Sacramento desperately wanted that spark, so they settled for him. They wanted motion, spacing, modern basketball, the feeling of something finally happening. But Golden State's beauty was never just motion. It was discipline disguised as freedom. It was structure masquerading as improvisation. Sacramento didn't have the infrastructure for that. They didn't have the hierarchy, the accountability, or the shared belief. And Walton never built it. He encouraged players to run, to push pace, to attack early offense. The Kings sprinted, shot fast, and looked exciting in flashes. But excitement without direction becomes noise. Every of their possessions bled away. Their defensive focus evaporated, and roles blurred. They hovered, not in a terrible way, neither was it in a good way. They were just stuck in the NBA's most dangerous middle ground, where growth pretends to happen, but never actually does, and hovering is the slowest form of falling. Walton didn't fail because the ideas were wrong. His philosophy was sound, the talent was real. De'Aaron Fox was ascending, Tyrese Halliburton emerging, Buddy Hield scoring, but there was no system to hold them together. No identity, no standard. Walton offered comfort in a franchise that needed confrontation. He gave space when the team needed structure. Comfort does not build contenders. Only clarity, structure, and leadership does. And in Sacramento, the promise never developed. Not because it couldn't, but because no one demanded that it should. Brian Shaw, Denver Nuggets, 2013 to 2015. The wrong message for the wrong room. Brian Shaw was like that high school teacher hoping to teach. However, nobody in Nuggets' locker room came to learn. The Nuggets had just been a 57-win track meet under George Karl. Fast, free, and improvisational. They didn't overwhelm teams with talent. Instead, they overwhelmed them with pace. But for Shaw, he wanted the opposite. He wanted half-court sets, structured reads, a slower tempo, and most importantly to him, more control. He tried to slow a team that only knew how to run. Unfortunately, the players were not into his bluff. They didn't understand why the playbook was changing, and Shaw didn't know how to explain it in a language they respected. All of these led to meetings becoming lectures, film sessions turned into a silence game, the energy in the locker room. It was dead upon Shaw's arrival. At one point, Shaw tried sending messages through the media to his players, and they gladly responded by rapping about him in group text chains. The disconnect wasn't about basketball, it was about the respect Shaw couldn't communicate. The team didn't reject Shaw's ideas, they rejected the way he delivered them. And once a locker room tunes out its coach, every game is already lost. Anyways, he got his termination right in that box. Randy Wittman, Washington Wizards, 2012 to 2016. The ceiling you can't break through. Randy Wittman was that tough old school tone, guy on the street, who's hard on accountability. Young John Wall and Bradley Beal were the structure helped as the Wizards became respectable. They had their boxes ticked, physical defense ticked, solid rotations ticked, playoff wins ticked. This was a team with identity, but Wittman had hit a ceiling and couldn't see past it. The offense never evolved. Just as the spacing became outdated, his ball movement was easy to predict on the court. Wall and Beal were ready to grow, but the system didn't grow with them. They became stuck. This has nothing to do with their talent, as they were in their A game. They were stuck because the playbook stayed the same. The NBA is a league on its own where schemes adapt every year. Stability slowly becomes stagnation. Unfortunately, the Wizards had had enough and decided to spit Wittman out before he caused more disaster. The Wizards didn't fire Wittman for failure. They basically did because the future required creativity, and he only offered repetition. Jeff Hornacek, New York Knicks 2016 to 2018. The Triangle's final ghost. Jeff Hornacek didn't take over a team. He walked into a seance. Because the Knicks weren't trying to build something new, they were trying to resurrect something old. Phil Jackson still believed the Triangle offense could live forever. But the Triangle was never just a system. It was a language spoken only by basketball geniuses at the peak of their powers. Jordan, Pippen, Kobe, Shaq. New York did not have that. Hornacek wanted to push pace, play faster, open the floor, let players breathe. But Phil wanted structure, spacing by memory, reads by repetition, and decisions from a blueprint drawn in the 90s. So the Knicks existed between two eras, 1 foot in nostalgia, 1 foot in the modern game. And a team split in philosophy becomes a team split in identity. Carmelo Anthony felt trapped inside a geometry he didn't believe in. Kristaps Porzingis floated between superstardom and confusion. Role players had roles that changed depending on which system was being whispered that day. Hornacek wasn't coaching, he was basically translating. And translations do not inspire belief. He didn't have control. All he had was a clipboard and a title, while decisions came from above. And when a coach does not choose the system, he cannot lead it. Eventually, the organization did what organizations always do. When confusion outlives patience, they fired the coach and kept the confusion. Hornacek didn't fail because he was wrong. He failed because he was never truly allowed to coach at all. Stan Van Gundy, Detroit Pistons. Stan Van Gundy took full control in Detroit as coach and president of basketball operations. It was carried out with one voice, one vision, and no internal debate. And that was the problem. Van Gundy believed in a system where 4 shooters spacing the floor and 1 dominant interior presence. He had that in Orlando with Dwight Howard, where the system thrived. He bought his hype and decided to roll the same dice in Detroit. He tried to recreate it with Andre Drummond. But Drummond wasn't Dwight. He wasn't a gravity machine. Neither was he the kind of center defenses to bend around. He was simply a rebounder, finisher, and worker, but not the system's anchor. Instead of adjusting the scheme to the roster, Van Gundy adjusted the roster to the scheme. He traded, drafted, and signed players to fill theoretical roles, and not an actual chemistry. He was like that confused lecturer facing the board, confused while trying to solve a perplexing equation. His spacing looked forced, the shot creation was flimsy, ball movement stalled because nobody on the floor was a natural initiator. Then came the Blake Griffin trade, a star name, a huge contract, a move that screamed desperation louder than confidence. Blake played well heroically, even though the team still stalled, because the strategy was way backward. Van Gundy failed to build identity. Instead of that, he tried to import one. However, when Detroit finally pulled the plug, the franchise wasn't just losing games. It was asset poor, cap strained, and identity empty. Van Gundy didn't fail because the idea was bad. He failed because he insisted the idea mattered more than the reality in front of him. Mike D'Antoni, Los Angeles Lakers. Mike D'Antoni was hired to coach a roster built for anything except Mike D'Antoni basketball. Kobe Bryant, Dwight Howard, Pau Gasol, Steve Nash. On paper, it looked like a super team with that caliber of players. But in reality, it was a philosophical car crash. D'Antoni's system is simple. He wanted pace, spacing, threes, screens, and read and react rhythm. For him, if the ball moves fast, the players are expected to move faster. But Los Angeles didn't have the speed he was looking for. What they had was size and post play. The players wanted something else from the plan he gave them. Dwight wanted post touches, Pau needed elbow touches, Kobe wanted the ball where Kobe always got the ball. They all wanted their balling game, but instead of bending the system, D'Antoni forced it. He minimized Pau's role, tried to turn Dwight into a rim runner. He needed Nash to orchestrate, but Nash was injured, so the system ran without its engine. The locker room was not left out. It turned into quiet chaos. It was not an explosive one, but bad enough to keep anyone uncomfortable. Dwight became disconnected to everything. Kobe pushed harder, but it doesn't seem to be enough. They all resulted in blurred roles. The team ended up looking like 5 players believing in 5 different offenses. No coach in NBA history is more dependent on fit than D'Antoni. When the roster fits, his offense looks like magic, and when it doesn't, it looks like static. However, he got his special package at the other side of the court. The Lakers didn't fail because D'Antoni couldn't coach. They failed because the system and the roster were playing 2 different sports. Silas, Houston Rockets. Silas didn't walk into a rebuild. He walked into a franchise falling apart in real time. When he accepted the Rockets job in 2020, he believed he was signing up to coach James Harden, a perennial MVP, surrounded by veterans ready to compete. He had waited 20 years for this moment. Assistant for legends, respected for his offensive mind, smart, calm, and patient. This move was supposed to be his breakthrough, but then everything collapsed. Harden demanded out immediately, not quietly, nor in privately, but publicly. There were series of trade rumors like thunder overhead. What Silas's had considered as a dream job turned into a storm he didn't create. Within weeks, the roster transformed into the youngest core in the NBA. His team had talent, no doubt. They were raw, unshaped, bow hierarchy, and veteran guidance. It was just potential everywhere and direction nowhere. Silas tried to teach, tried to encourage, even tried to create structure. But young players don't learn fast, and a locker room with no identity absorbs chaos like a sponge. The team hit rock bottom, with not small losses, but historic losing streaks. Each games felt like no effort was put in. People blame Silas for not controlling the locker room. But how do you control a team that was never built to win games in the first place? Silas didn't fail because he couldn't coach. He failed because he was handed a blueprint with pieces missing and told to build a skyscraper. Sometimes the job doesn't break the coach, the situation does. Coaching in the NBA isn't just about the plays. It's about pressure, personalities, and moments that decide legacies. Some moves became legendary, while some become a bitter tale. Lovers of NBA, which disaster shocked you the most? Drop it in the comments section below. Don't forget to like if you love the stories behind the game, and subscribe, because the NBA's hidden chaos is far from over, and we're just getting started right here.